Chapter 1. The day my father threw my grandmother's bankbook into her grave and called it worthless. The day my father threw my grandmother's bankbook into her grave and called it worthless, he didn't just bury paper. He buried $400,000, and the only thing he ever thought he controlled. What he didn't know was that years earlier, after he suggested selling her condo for cash, she legally made me the beneficiary. I'm Rachel, and this is the story of how my own family tried to pressure me into giving it up, and how one signature changed everything. The day my father threw my grandmother's bankbook into her grave, he looked directly at me while he did it. Not at the casket. Not at the dirt. At me. It was early April in Cedar Falls, Ohio, and the wind moved hard through Maple Grove Cemetery. The service had just ended. People were already shifting toward their cars, relief hidden behind polite faces. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, 88 years old, had lived alone and paid her own bills until the very end. She never asked anyone for money. She never missed a payment in her life. I am 35. I work in risk compliance for a regional health insurance company. My job is to follow documentation, to find what others overlook, to understand how signatures quietly move power. At that graveside, I was the only one thinking about power. My father, Douglas Whitaker, 64, owned a small medical supply company that had been losing contracts since late 2023. I knew about the federal relief loan he was still paying from 2021. I knew cash flow had tightened. I knew assets were no longer sentimental to him. Assets were leverage. As executor of my grandmother's estate, he believed control was already his. My brother Mason stood a few feet away, scrolling through his phone. 37 years old, real estate license, opinions about equity. My stepmother Karen had already mentioned listing timelines before the minister finished the final prayer. Grief did not delay strategy in our family. Then my father reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a faded Navy passbook from River County Community Credit Union. I recognized it immediately. It used to sit on my grandmother's kitchen table every Sunday afternoon while we drank tea. She would smooth the pages with her palm, as if calming something alive. This was her obsession, my father said, loud enough for the small crowd to hear. She thought this thing was worth something. His eyes locked on mine. It is worthless now, Rachel. The way he said my name made it sound small. Then he let it fall into the open grave. It landed on the lid of her casket with a dull, final sound. For a moment, even the wind seemed to hesitate. No one objected. Mason exhaled softly, almost amused. Karen looked down at her shoes. The funeral workers shifted their weight, unsure whether to continue. My throat tightened, but I did not cry. Her name was Eleanor, I said quietly. He had already turned away. People began moving toward their cars. Gravel crunched. Conversations shifted to probate filings, to inventory lists, to how quickly the condo could be prepared for sale. If the passbook truly meant nothing, he would not have brought it. If it truly was worthless, he would have left it at home. Instead, he made sure I watched it fall. I waited until the last car door shut. "Excuse me," I told the funeral worker, and before he could protest, I stepped carefully down the loose soil. I picked up the passbook before the first shovel of dirt touched it. When I climbed back up, Mason was watching. "You cannot be serious," he said. "That thing probably has $50 in it." "Maybe," I replied. I slid it into my bag. "Paper protects you," my grandmother told me in 2019, while sunlight spilled across her kitchen table. "People change. Paper does not." Back then, I thought she meant wills and insurance policies. I did not realize she might have meant survival. We drove straight from the cemetery to her condo on the north side of Cedar Falls. 3rd floor, built in the early 80s, paid off long ago. Nothing flashy. Mason had always called it depressing. My father unlocked the door and walked inside with the posture of a man evaluating inventory. "We should list this within 2 weeks," he said immediately. "The market is steady. No reason to delay." Karen nodded. "Estate sale first, then staging. The sooner we liquidate, the better." Liquidate. The word settled into the room. Mason stepped into the living room and glanced around. "I wonder how much equity is sitting in here," he said. Equity. Not memories. Not photographs. Not Sunday dinners. Equity. As executor, my father began outlining deadlines: probate filings, asset inventory, court submission timelines. He spoke with confidence of someone who believed the math was already finished. I stood in the kitchen, my bag still on my shoulder, and listened to them convert my grandmother's life into numbers. For 7 years, I had been the one who drove her to appointments. I sorted her prescriptions. I fixed her router when the internet stopped working. I listened when she talked about the packaging plant where she worked for 30 decades without missing a single mortgage payment. Mason had visited twice in that time. I placed my bag on the kitchen counter and pulled out the passbook. The first page showed an opening deposit from 1994, $10,000. There were printed entries through the late 90s, then nothing. On paper, it looked dormant. I flipped to the inside back cover. In her careful handwriting were the words, "The book is only the key. For Rachel. Only Rachel." My pulse slowed instead of quicken. The key to what? Footsteps approached. "What are you doing in here?" Mason asked from the doorway. "Just looking." He saw the passbook and smirked. "You were always sentimental," he said. "Those credit unions merged years ago. It is probably closed." "Probably," I answered. He slugged and walked away. In 2020, I complained to my grandmother about my student loans, $18,280 left. She asked detailed questions about my loan servicer, about whether outside payments were allowed. I thought she was just being curious. A year later, a large payment reduced my balance. I never traced it. Standing there in her graveside, while my father discussed listing strategy and probate forms in the next room, something shifted inside me. If the passbook truly meant nothing, he would not have performed that gesture at the cemetery. He wanted it erased. He just didn't understand what it protected. And for the first time that afternoon, I realized something else. He thought he was in control. He had no idea that control might have already been signed away years ago. Chapter 2. What They Thought I Was Worth. By the time I reached my apartment that night, my phone had already lit up 3 times with Mason's name. He never called me that early unless money was involved. I let it ring twice before answering. "You really keeping that old bank book?" he asked, skipping hello. I set my keys on the counter. "Why does it matter?" "Mom saw you pick it up at the cemetery," he said. "Dad thinks you might be planning to take it somewhere." "Somewhere. Like a bank," he added. His tone tried to stay casual, but there was something sharpened underneath it now. Not teasing, not dismissive. alert. "It is just paper," I said. "That is what Dad said, right?" There was a small pause. "If it's tied to Grandma's accounts, it has to go through the estate. Dad has to report all assets, you know that." "I work in compliance, Mason. I know how reporting works." Another pause. "Just do not make this complicated," he said quietly. Complicated. For most of my life, I had been the uncomplicated one, the responsible one, the child who did not require investment. Mason received $40,000 from our father in 2019 for a down payment on his house. I received advice about financial discipline. He inherited opportunity. I inherited restraint. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove downtown to Franklin Community Credit Union. River County Community Credit Union had merged into Franklin in 2012. In 2019, Franklin restructured certain legacy share certificates into equity participation accounts. Mergers do not erase records, they layer them. The branch was modern and bright, with neutral carpet and soft instrumental music playing overhead. Nothing about it suggested that somewhere inside, a record from 1994 might still exist. A teller greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I placed the passbook on the counter. "I'm trying to locate a legacy account from River County. My grandmother recently passed away." She examined the cover, worn and faded. "That is old," she said. "Yes." "Do you have an account number?" I turned the book over and pointed to the handwritten digits on the back. She typed slowly, frowned, then typed again. "I'm not seeing anything active under that number." "It would have predated your merger in 2012, I said. "It may be archived." She nodded and made a quick call. A few minutes later, a man in his early 30s approached and introduced himself as Aaron Kim from Information Systems. "You're looking for something from River County?" he said. "Yes." He studied the number, then disappeared behind a frosted glass door. I waited, watching customers discuss car loans and savings rates. My phone vibrated again in my purse. "Mason." I let it buzz out. Aaron returned 10 minutes later, his expression no longer neutral. "I'm seeing a legacy account tied to that number," he said carefully. "I'm going to bring in our branch manager." He gestured toward a hallway. "Please come with me." The office was enclosed in glass, bright and orderly. A woman in her mid-40s stood as we entered. "I'm Rebecca Collins, branch manager," she said. "Rachel Whitaker." She examined the passbook and then looked at me. "Your grandmother passed away recently?" "Yes." "Do you have a death certificate and identification?" I handed them over. She reviewed both carefully before turning to her screen. "This account was opened in 1994 as a share certificate with an initial deposit of $10,000. My breathing slowed. "It was set to automatically renew annually with dividends reinvested. Over time, that structure compounds." Compounds. The word landed headier than I expected. "After our structural conversion in 2019, the account transitioned into an equity participation framework under the new charter." She scrolled further. "There's also a beneficiary designation on file." My hands tightened in my lap. "The beneficiary was updated in 2018. Updated? To whom?" I asked. Rebecca met my eyes. "To you." For a moment, the room felt slightly tilted. No one in my family had ever placed my name first on anything of value. Not property, not opportunity, not inheritance. "Is this part of the probate estate?" I asked carefully. "No," she replied. "Payable on death accounts transferred directly to the named beneficiary. They do not pass through probate." "Executor authority?" Executor authority. For the first time since the cemetery, I understood why my father had wanted that passbook buried. Rebecca continued. "Because this account predates 2 mergers and includes historical dividend accrual and equity conversion ratios, we need to complete a compliance reconciliation before releasing full details." "What kind of reconciliation?" "Dividend history, conversion multipliers, participation unit valuation. Accounts structured like this can grow significantly over decades." Significantly. "It's not a negligible amount," she added in a measured tone. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not excitement, not yet. Recognition. It's been compounding for nearly 30 years. Nearly 30 years. Is there a preliminary estimate? I asked. I prefer to give you confirmed numbers, Rebecca said. We'll need approximately 48 hours to finalize the calculations. 48 hours? Your grandmother was intentional in updating the beneficiary in 2018. That's not something people do without thought. Intentional. I remembered that year. I had just received a promotion at work. I had complained about my student loan balance. She had asked detailed questions about my servicer and whether outside payments were allowed. I had assumed she was curious. Rebecca handed my documents back to me. We'll contact you once compliance signs off. Until then, I would recommend discretion. Discretion. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the sunlight felt sharper than before. My phone rang. Dad. I answered on the third ring. Where are you? He asked. Running errands. What kind of errands? Estate-related. Silence. Your brother said you went somewhere about that old account. I looked at my reflection in the bank window. I verified some paperwork. For what? To understand what exists. As executor, I need to know about all assets, he said. If there's anything tied to your grandmother's accounts, it must be disclosed. Not all accounts are estate assets, I replied calmly. Another silence. What does that mean? It means some transfers happen outside probate. His breathing changed slightly. Do not create problems where there are none. Problems. For years, I had absorbed problems so no one else had to. You might not control everything she left, I said quietly. There was a long pause on the line. Rachel. I ended the call before he could say more. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be told what something was worth. I was waiting for numbers that had been compounding quietly for decades. And whatever those numbers were, they were no longer his.
Chapter 3. The account that wasn't supposed to exist. 48 hours later, I walked back into Franklin Community Credit Union with a calm I did not fully recognize in myself. The sky over Cedar Falls was pale and flat, the kind of gray that made everything feel suspended. Inside the branch, nothing looked dramatic. A couple at the counter discussed auto loan rates. Someone laughed softly near the teller line. Rebecca Collins was waiting for me in her glass office, a thick folder resting neatly on her desk. "We've completed the reconciliation," she said. "Please have a seat." I sat down and placed my hands on my knees to steady them. She opened the folder. The original share certificate was opened in 1994 with a $10,000 deposit. Dividends were reinvested annually. Between 2005 and 2015, additional deposits were made each year, typically between $1,000 and $2,000. Each year. Quietly. After our structural conversion in 2019, the account transitioned into equity participation units. Those units appreciated significantly over the next several years. Significantly. She turned a page and slid a summary sheet toward me. As of March 2024, the confirmed balance is $412,873.61. For a second, I thought she had handed me the wrong document. 412,000? My grandmother had never owned anything flashy. She clipped coupons. She compared grocery prices by ounce. She reused envelopes. And yet, it has been compounding for nearly 30 years, Rebecca said gently. Your grandmother was remarkably consistent. Compounding. Nearly 30 years. This was not luck, it was discipline. So this transfers directly to me? I said. Yes, she replied. You are the named payable on death beneficiary, updated in 2018. The funds bypass probate entirely. They are not part of the estate inventory. Not part of the estate. Executor authority does not apply.
I felt something settle inside me. Not excitement, not triumph, authority. "There is another item you should see," Rebecca added. She flipped to a transaction record. In August of 2017, a withdrawal of $10,000 was processed from this account and sent to a third-party loan servicer. I knew before she said the name. It was mine, my student loan company. I felt the room tilt slightly. In 2017, your outstanding balance was approximately $18,000. The withdrawal form was signed in person by your grandmother. We have the notarized documentation. Notarized. Paper protects you. In 2017, my balance had dropped unexpectedly. I assumed it was a restructuring adjustment. I never questioned it. She had paid more than half without telling me. She updated the beneficiary designation in 2018. That change was witnessed and notarized. There are 2 independent signatures on file. 2 witnesses. Not casual, not accidental. "Is there any realistic way this could be challenged?" I asked. Rebecca met my eyes. "Inheritance disputes do happen," she said carefully. "However, contesting a notarized payable on death designation requires credible evidence of fraud or coercion. Based on the documentation in this file, that would be extremely difficult." Extremely difficult. I nodded. I later confirmed with a probate attorney that, absent proof of undue influence, the designation stands. Paperwork over feelings. I signed the acknowledgement forms. I provided routing instructions for the transfer. Rebecca closed the folder. $400,000 is not a small inheritance. It tends to change conversations. Change conversations. Outside, I sat in my car with the engine off. $412,873.61. That kind of money does not hide. It shifts power. It redraws expectations. My phone rang before I left the parking lot. Dad. I answered on the 3rd ring. "You've been quiet," he said. "I had a meeting. At the credit union. Not a question." "Yes." Silence. "And?" he said. "It exists," I replied. "What exists?" "The account." His breathing sharpened slightly. "Rachel, if there is an asset tied to your grandmother's finances, I am legally obligated to report it. As executor, I must inventory everything." "This one does not go through the estate," I said. "It is a payable on death designation, updated 2018, notarized, witnessed." Another silence. "Updated to who?" "To me." The word settled between us. "That does not make sense," he said. "Your grandmother would have discussed something of that magnitude with me." "She discussed it with the bank." His tone shifted, softer now, strategic. "We need to sit down as a family. There are obligations. The company is in a transitional phase. Liquidity matters." Liquidity. Assets were leverage. "I understand liquidity," I said evenly. "I also understand beneficiary law." "You are looking at this too narrowly," he replied. "We have to think bigger." $400,000 changes conversations. "You might not control everything she left," I said quietly. A long pause. "Rachel," he was not angry, not yet. He was recalculating. "I am willing to discuss anything," he said finally, "but this needs to be handled properly." Handled properly. I ended the call before he could move from persuasion to guilt. A message from Mason appeared almost immediately. "Dad says you found something. How much?" I did not answer. Instead, I opened my banking app. The pending transfer notification had appeared. $412,873.61. My grandmother had never missed a payment in her life. Now she had made one more. The difference was, this time, the transfer did not require my father's approval. Chapter 4. They wanted a family meeting. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at my grandmother's condo, 2 days before the photographer was scheduled to take listing photos. Dad insisted we meet there instead of his house. "It's neutral," he said over the phone. There was nothing neutral about that space. Her armchair still faced the window. A faint trace of lavender detergent lingered in the air. Half-packed boxes lined the hallway, as if the apartment itself was waiting for instructions. Mason stood by the kitchen counter when I arrived. His wife, Claire, sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone, though she wasn't reading anything. Dad stood near the sliding glass door, arms folded. "Let's get started," he said. I took a seat at the table. "As executor," he began, "I have authority to list this condo. However, we cannot close until the court grants clearance. Probate in this county is running about 4 to 6 months." He spoke calmly, measured. "That delay creates a cash problem," he continued. "Whitaker Medical Supply has an outstanding SBA loan balance of $320,000. If we cannot inject capital before the next quarter, we risk default. Default. If we default," he added, "we lose the warehouse. The bank will not wait." There it was. Not grief, not unity, leverage. Mason leaned forward. "This company has been in the family for almost 30 years, he said. "It supports employees. It supports us. It supports you," I replied quietly. He ignored that. "We all know you went back to the credit union," Dad said. "Yes, and we know there was something there." I met his eyes. "Yes." Claire finally looked up. "So how much are we talking about?" she asked carefully. "I'm not discussing numbers," I said. Mason's jaw tightened. "If you received inheritance money, then the family should benefit. That's how this works." "That's how what works?" I asked. "Family," he snapped. "You don't just sit on $400,000 while Dad's business collapses." The number hung in the room. I did not confirm it. "Where did you get that figure?" I asked evenly. "You didn't deny it," he shot back. Dad raised a hand slightly. "This isn't about accusing anyone," he said. "It's about survival. If the company fails, the ripple effect hits everyone." "You built that company," I said. "You structured the debt." "I built that company for this family," he replied, his voice tightening. "You think I wanted to ask you?" There it was, the shift from authority to wounded pride. Mason leaned forward. "She would have wanted us united. Grandma always said family comes first." "She also said paperwork matters," I answered. I opened my bag and placed a thin folder on the dining table. "I met with a probate attorney," I said. "The account in question is a payable on death designation. It bypasses probate entirely. It is not part of the estate inventory. The executor has no authority over it." I slid the written confirmation from Daniel Ortiz across the table. Dad looked at the header but did not pick it up. "That doesn't mean you don't owe us," Mason said. "Oh," I repeated. "Yes, you owe the family. You owe Dad." "Did you owe me $40,000 in 2019? I asked. He stiffened. "That was different." "How?" "That was an investment." "In you," I said. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Dad exhaled slowly. "Rachel, we are not asking you to surrender anything," he said carefully. "We are asking you to contribute to something larger than yourself." "Under what terms?" I asked. "What terms do you need?" Mason snapped angrily. "This isn't a contract negotiation." "It is if you're asking for capital." Silence. "If I were an outside investor," I continued, "you would provide financial statements, debt schedules, cash flow projections, restructuring plans. Instead, you're offering guilt." "That's unfair," Dad said. "Is it?" He hesitated. "I looked for that passbook before the funeral," he admitted. Mason turned toward him. "You did?" Yes, Dad said quietly. I checked her desk, her filing cabinet. I couldn't find it. She kept it in a locked metal box, I said. I didn't have the key. The room fell quiet. She changed the beneficiary after we argued about selling this condo, he said. I told her it was inefficient to keep this asset tied up. I told her we should liquidate while the market was strong. Liquidate, I repeated. She said she wasn't ready. She said this place was security. And you told her security was a poor use of capital. He did not deny it. She did not trust you, I said. That's not what this is, Mason snapped. It is exactly what this is, I replied calmly. She moved the beneficiary in 2018. She had 2 witnesses and a notary. That is not accidental. Dad's face tightened. You're willing to let everything I built fall apart? I am not responsible for your leverage decisions, I answered. Mason stood up abruptly. This is selfish. No, I replied. This is boundary. Claire finally spoke. Maybe instead of accusing her, we should actually show her the numbers, she said softly. If we want help, we should present it like a proposal. Dad looked at her, then back at me. If I bring full financials, he asked slowly, would you consider participating? Consider, I repeated, not guarantee. He nodded once. That's all I'm asking. For the record, I said, tapping the legal confirmation, the funds are legally mine. They are not estate property. They are not subject to executor discretion. That is not emotion. That is law. No one argued with the word law. The power dynamic in the room shifted, not loudly, but decisively. For the first time in my life, I was not defending myself. I was setting terms.
Chapter 5. What she was really building. Nothing exploded after that meeting. It quieted. The condo moved through probate exactly as the court required. My father listed it under his authority as executor, but the sale could not close until court clearance was granted. Everything followed the process: inventory, filing, waiting. No one said the word inheritance again. The language changed. Instead of our money, it became your decision. Instead of family obligation, it became complicated timing. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply changes the vocabulary in the room. The transfer cleared on a Wednesday afternoon. $412,873.61. I did not celebrate. I did not call anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the number until it stopped feeling like shock and started feeling like structure. My grandmother never used money to impress anyone. She used it to prepare. The following week, I visited the Oak Ridge Community Center, where she had donated quietly for years. From 2010 through 2023, she contributed between $500 and $1,000 annually, always marked anonymous. Mrs. Dalton, the director, looked up from an old ledger. She never skipped a year, she said, even when attendance was low. Mrs. Lopez, 72, her longtime neighbor, sat near the window. She told me she wasn't moving, Mrs. Lopez said. Said, once you give someone else control of your money, you spend the rest of your life asking permission. Permission? She saw things clearly, Mrs. Lopez added, especially when it came to family pressure. I did not need more detail. I placed a check for $25,000 on the desk. I'd like to create the Eleanor Whitaker Community Grant for adult education and financial literacy programs. No plaque, no ceremony. Mrs. Dalton's eyes softened. She would like that. She already chose it, I replied. The rest of the funds remained invested, structured carefully, diversified conservatively, not reactive, not emotional. Whitaker Medical Supply did not default that quarter. My father restructured part of the SBA loan and sold surplus equipment to stabilize payroll. He never asked me for capital again. At one point, he said quietly over the phone, "I'll handle it."
Not we, not us. The vocabulary had shifted. The condo eventually closed after court clearance. The proceeds flowed through the estate and were distributed according to the will. No one challenged the beneficiary designation. No one used the word "oh" again. Authority had settled. One early September morning, I drove back to Hillside Cemetery. The grass had thickened since spring. The air carried that quiet warmth that comes before fall. I brought the old Navy passbook with me. On the inside cover, the bank had stamped the final line: account closed, beneficiary paid. I knelt at the base of her headstone and rested the passbook against the stone. For a moment, I said nothing. For a second, I almost expected her to correct me about something small, the way she used to. Instead, there was only wind moving through the trees. "You weren't building a fortune," I said quietly. "You were building distance. Distance from guilt disguised as unity, from obligation disguised as love, from pressure disguised as responsibility." I touched the carved letters of her name. "I should have thanked you sooner." She did not fight anyone. She did not argue. She signed. The signature she wrote in 2018 did more than move money. It moved power. Preparation is not loud. It is deliberate. It lives in notarized forms, in beneficiary lines, in the quiet decision to protect someone before they know they need protecting. $400,000 changes conversations, but clarity changes people. The real inheritance was not the balance. It was permission. Permission to say no without apology. Permission to evaluate requests without guilt. Permission to separate love from leverage. As I stood, I realized something else. Strength is not endurance. Strength is structure, and structure outlasts emotion. I picked up the passbook once more and held it briefly in my hands. "You were right," I said softly. "People change. Paper does not." The cemetery remained silent. No confrontation, no applause, just resolution. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have surrendered the account to preserve peace? Would you have negotiated terms? Or would you have let the paperwork stand? Have you ever been pressured to give up something that was legally yours in the name of family? If you have, I would genuinely like to hear your story. And if you believe that preparation is power, that boundaries are not cruelty, and that sometimes the strongest response is a quiet one backed by documentation, stay with me. There are more stories like this.